Hi, I'm Vera, and it's time for some stories. The first is about a man found dead in a Missouri cornfield. No cause of death, no suspect, no motive. Only two folded pieces of paper in his pocket covered in a code that the FBI has never been able to crack. The second is about a British spy, a mathematical genius, one of the best codebreakers MI6 had. Found naked and decomposing inside a padlocked sports bag in his bathtub. The coroner said murder. The police said accident. Neither side has ever changed their position. And the third is about a bridge in Scotland that dogs have been jumping from since the 1950s. Dozens have died. Some survivors have gone back and jumped again. No one has a complete explanation for why. 3 cases. No clean endings. It starts with a cornfield, and a dead man, and a secret no one has been able to read. The notes were still in his pocket when they found him. 2 pieces of paper, folded, unremarkable, covered in letters and numbers and parentheses that formed no recognizable language, no recognizable pattern, nothing the human mind could walk through to find the other side. The FBI's best cryptanalysts would later spend 12 years trying to break them. They never did. On the last day of June, 1999, a woman driving a back road through a cornfield in St. Charles County, Missouri, noticed something lying face down in the dirt. She pulled over. She looked closer. She never forgot what she saw. The man's body had been there for days. The summer heat had done its work. By the time sheriff's deputies arrived, the decomposition was so advanced they could not identify him by sight. They had to use fingerprints that had already begun to slip from the skin. His name was Ricky McCormick. He was 41 years old. He had no car. He couldn't drive. The field where they found him was 15 miles from his apartment in St. Louis. No one could explain how he got there. The medical examiner could not determine how he died. The cause of death was officially listed as undetermined. There were no obvious wounds, no poison in what was left of his blood. The body had simply been there too long. Whatever had happened to Ricky McCormick had happened somewhere else. And he had been brought to that cornfield the way a thing is brought somewhere when no one is meant to find it for a very long time. Ricky was not a man who drew attention. He had dropped out of school young and never gone back. By most accounts, he was barely literate. His own family said he could sign his name and not much else. He had worked a series of low-wage jobs, moved between addresses in the St. Louis area, kept to himself. There was nothing in his life, at first glance, that suggested anything unusual. And then there were the notes. When investigators emptied his pockets, they found 2 folded pieces of lined paper covered in what appeared to be a personal cipher, letters arranged in blocks, numbers, dashes, parentheses. The characters were consistent, not random looking, not the scattered marks of someone doodling. There was structure. There was a system. Someone who knew the key could read it. Nobody knew the key. The notes were handed to the FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, the CRRU, one of the most specialized code-breaking operations in American law enforcement. These were people who spent their careers cracking hidden messages used by organized crime, drug cartels, people who had very serious reasons to keep their communications invisible. They looked at Ricky McCormick's notes for over a decade. They applied every technique they knew. They could not get past step 2 of 4 in the decryption process. Standard routes of cryptanalysis seemed to have hit brick walls, the unit's chief, Dan Olson, would later say. They brought in the American Cryptogram Association. Still nothing. "We look at a lot of things that are gibberish," Olson explained. "This is not that case." The characters were not random. There were many E's, possibly spacers. There were recognizable patterns throughout. The code had rules. It was just that no one alive knew what they were. Here is where it becomes stranger. In 2012, a year after the FBI finally made the notes public, asking the world for help, Ricky's family came forward, and they said something that hadn't appeared anywhere in the official record. Ricky couldn't write in code. He could barely write at all. The only thing he could write was his name, said his mother. He didn't write in no code. His cousin put it more bluntly. Ricky couldn't spell anything, just scribble. The family insisted they had told investigators this years earlier. They said investigators had misunderstood, that Ricky sometimes jotted down what he called writing, random marks that meant nothing, a habit he'd had since childhood. They were not codes. They were noise. But the FBI disagreed. Their analysts maintained the notes were too structured to be meaningless. The patterns were too consistent. Whatever those papers contained, it was not gibberish. Which leaves a question that has never been answered. If Ricky didn't write those notes, who did? One possibility, the one that keeps returning to investigators who have looked at this case, is that the notes were written by whoever killed him. That they were not meant to go to the police. That they were placed in Ricky's pocket deliberately. Or that Ricky was carrying them for someone else. Someone who used him as a courier and then decided that couriers were a liability. Another possibility is darker still, that the notes name the person who put Ricky in that field. That the answer to who killed him has existed all along on 2 folded pieces of paper, and 25 years later, no one has been able to read it. The last known place Ricky was seen alive was a hospital waiting room in St. Louis. He was getting a routine checkup. 5 days later, he was face down in the dirt 15 miles away. The killer was never identified. The motive was never established. The notes remain classified as one of the FBI's top unsolved cryptographic cases. They are still posted on the Bureau's website. Thousands of people have tried. Nobody has broken it. Some mysteries leave a body and a code with no answer. Some leave a body with no explanation at all. What comes next is worse, because the people responsible for investigating it may have been the ones who made it disappear. The bag was locked from the outside. The key was inside the bag, beneath the body. There were no fingerprints on the padlock, no fingerprints on the rim of the bath. no signs of forced entry into the flat, no cause of death that the toxicologists could determine. And the intelligence service he worked for, one of the most powerful surveillance agencies in the world, had not reported him missing for 8 days. This is the story of Gareth Williams. It is a story that has never been resolved, and it is a story that certain very powerful institutions have worked very hard to keep that way. Gareth was not like other people. He had begun studying mathematics part-time at university while he was still in secondary school. He graduated with a first-class degree at 17. He later pursued a PhD, though he left the program, not because he couldn't finish it, but because something else had come along. GCHQ recruited him in 2001. He was one of the best mathematical minds they had found in years. His work involved code and cipher, breaking communications, understanding systems, following money through networks that powerful and criminal people wanted invisible. By 2010, he had been seconded to MI6, Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service. He was 31 years old and working on some of the most sensitive operations in British intelligence, including efforts to trace international money laundering routes connected to Russian organized crime. He had already applied to transfer back to GCHQ. He was due to return on September 3rd, 2010. He was found on August 23rd. A welfare check. That's what the police called it when they finally knocked on the door of the Pimlico flat. A safe house, government-owned, steps from MI6 headquarters. A colleague had grown concerned. Williams hadn't been in contact for days. The officer who entered the flat found the apartment extremely neat. Everything in order. The central heating was running on full, despite the midsummer heat outside. On a table near the door, multiple phones, SIM cards, a woman's wig. In the ensuite bathroom of the main bedroom, sitting inside the bathtub, was a red North Face sports hold-all. When the officer lifted the bag, a dark fluid began to run from the bottom. Inside, curled in the fetal position, was the naked and decomposing body of Gareth Williams. He had been dead for approximately a week. The padlock was on the outside of the zipped bag. The key was underneath him. The forensic examination produced a set of facts that police and experts have struggled to reconcile for 15 years. There were no fingerprints anywhere in the bathroom. Not on the padlock. Not on the bath. Not on the bag's zipper or its handles. DNA from at least 2 unidentified individuals was found on the bag itself. But it could not be matched to any known person, and it has never been explained. There was no sign of forced entry into the flat. There was no sign of a struggle. There was no poison in Williams' body, no obvious trauma. A pathologist calculated he would have been overcome by carbon dioxide buildup within 2 to 3 minutes of being sealed inside. In an experiment designed to determine whether a person could lock themselves inside a similar bag, trained escapologists and forensic scientists tried dozens of times. The bag was intentionally left wet, as it had been in the bath. None of them could lock it from the inside without leaving marks on the rim, the zipper, or the padlock. None of them could do it at all without detectable evidence of the attempt. The coroner, Fiona Wilcox, returned a verdict that Williams's death was unnatural and likely to have been criminally mediated. she concluded that a third party had locked the bag. She was satisfied on the balance of probabilities that Gareth was killed unlawfully. The Metropolitan Police disagreed. Their official position, issued in 2013, was that Williams had probably died alone, that he had entered the bag himself and locked it accidentally. The two official verdicts, murder and accident, have stood side by side ever since, and neither has been rescinded. In 2015, a former KGB agent named Boris Karpichkov, who had defected to Britain, gave interviews claiming that Russian intelligence, the SVR, was responsible, that Williams had been identified as a threat because of his work on the money laundering networks connected to Russian organized crime, that he had been killed by a professional team who left no trace because that is what professional teams do. There was something else, a detail that emerged during the inquest and never received a satisfying explanation. In the hours immediately after Williams's body was discovered, the head of MI6 and the most senior officer in the Metropolitan Police held a private meeting. The head of MI6 reportedly sought assurances that the investigation would not stray beyond its remit. The detective leading the homicide inquiry was not given direct access to witnesses from the intelligence services. A counterterrorism unit acted as an intermediary, passing along anonymous summaries of conversations, rather than allowing investigators to speak to people themselves. 9 memory sticks found in Williams's work locker were not disclosed until the final day of the inquest. The front door to the flat was removed by police, despite no evidence of a break-in, and replaced before a full forensic assessment had been completed. A forensic review concluded in November 2023 found no new DNA evidence and no new lines of inquiry. Gareth Williams has been dead for nearly 15 years. His death remains officially unsolved, and the institution best positioned to investigate it was the institution with the greatest interest in making sure certain things were never found. Some doors, once locked, are not meant to open again. What we're walking into next is older than spycraft, older than murder. It is a place in Scotland where something calls, and animals cannot help but answer. The dog had never done anything like it before. One moment, she was standing at the edge of Overtoun Bridge, still, nose lifted, staring at something her owner couldn't see. The next, she had bolted, and then she was gone, over the parapet, falling 50 feet into the rocky gorge below. Her owner stood at the edge and screamed. Against all reason, the dog was alive. She was broken and shaking, her back legs refusing to carry weight. She had landed on a ledge above the burn. What the owner would say afterward was not something she had words for. Only that the dog saw something. That whatever it was not visible to her. This was not the first time. It was not the 100th. Overtoun Bridge sits at the edge of a wooded estate in Dumbarton, Scotland, northwest of Glasgow. It is a handsome piece of Victorian stonework, 3 arches spanning a steep gorge built in 1895 to connect the grounds of Overtoun House to the surrounding land. For the first half-century of its existence, it was unremarkable. A bridge, a crossing, nothing more. Then, sometime in the 1950s, the dogs began to jump. It started slowly, isolated incidents, dismissed as accidents, but the pattern persisted across decades. Dog after dog, usually off-lead, would approach the bridge normally, then change. They would slow. They would raise their heads. Some became agitated, pulling toward the parapet. Others went still in a way their owners found deeply unsettling. And then, in almost every documented case, the animal would bolt directly for the same stretch of wall, on the same side, at the same point, and go over. The falls are survivable from certain angles. Many dogs did not survive. Local estimates place the total number of incidents at somewhere between 300 and 600 over the decades. The more conservatively verified figure is approximately 50 deaths confirmed. And in almost every case, the owners described the same thing: a dog behaving strangely for no visible reason, fixating on something, and then running as if in pursuit of something just beyond the bridge's edge. Stranger still, several dogs who survived the fall recovered from their injuries and were brought back to the area, went straight for the parapet again. The Scottish Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals sent investigators. They found nothing definitive. An animal behaviorist named David Sands conducted a more structured study, testing whether the scent of the mink living in the gorge below could be drawing dogs over the edge. Long-nosed breeds, the kind with the most sensitive olfactory systems, seemed to be overrepresented in the incidents. Sands presented dogs with canisters of mink scent and other wildlife scents. 7 out of 10 went for the mink, he said, and went for it with urgency. It is a tidy explanation. Mink are not native to Britain. They were introduced in the 1930s, and they produce a scent that dogs apparently find overwhelming. The theory goes that a dog catches that scent drifting up from the gorge, becomes consumed by it, loses its awareness of the drop below, and simply follows its instincts straight over the side. But there is a problem with this explanation that no one has satisfactorily answered. Mink live throughout Scotland. There are gorges and ravines and water features throughout the country where mink have made their homes. Why is Overtoun Bridge the only bridge in Scotland with this record? Why this specific stretch of wall? Always the same side, always the same spot. If the scent of mink were enough to send a dog over a parapet, it should be happening elsewhere. It isn't. The locals have a different theory, several of them. Some believe the bridge sits on what the old Celtic traditions called a thin place, a location where the membrane between this world and whatever lies beyond it is stretched near to breaking. Places where things come through. Places where animals, whose senses extend into registers humans cannot perceive, would feel the difference and respond to it. Others point to the ghost of Lady Overtoun, the widow of the Baron who built the house, who lived on the estate for years after his death in 1908, roaming the grounds, refusing to leave. Her presence, they say, has never fully departed. And then there is 1994. A former laboratory assistant walking Overtoun Bridge with his 2-week-old son threw the infant from the same spot where the dogs jump. He believed the child was a manifestation of the devil. He said he chose the bridge specifically because of what he knew about its association with dark spirits and ancient ritual. he survived his own subsequent attempt to jump. He was committed. The infant did not survive. People who have studied the case note that in almost every documented dog incident, the animals jump from the same location, and that same location is where the child was thrown. There is no clean resolution here. The mink theory is possible. It is also incomplete. The paranormal explanations are culturally embedded in this part of Scotland in ways that cannot be dismissed simply as superstition. People who live near Overtoun have a detailed and long-standing body of reported experience with the estate, and it does not read like folklore invented after the fact. What is certain is this: for more than 70 years, something at that bridge has been drawing living creatures over the edge. Something that works on the senses rather than the intellect, that bypasses the instinct for self-preservation and replaces it with something older or something entirely other. Something that dogs, with their wider spectrum perception, detect long before the jump. And whatever it is still there. If you ever find yourself walking a dog across Overtoun Bridge, and the animal goes still and lifts its head and stares at something you cannot see, keep hold of the lead. What unsettles me most about these stories isn't what happened. It's how easily it could have happened to anyone. If these stories held your attention, a like lets me know. I'm Vera, and I thank you for listening.